7:08. Good morning. Lord Clarke has told an inquiry he was not responsible for blood products during his time as Health Minister. About 3,000 people died after being given blood products containing HIV and hepatitis C in the 1970s and 1980s. Among them, 72 young people that were infected while at the Treloar Hospital in Alton in the 1980s. And Lord Clarke, Conservative Health Minister between 1982 and 85 and Health Secretary between 88 and 90, is the first senior health minister from the time to testify during the inquiry into this scandal. Our political reporter Tristan Pascoe joins me now. Tristan, good morning. Kenneth Clarke, former Health Secretary under Margaret Thatcher at the time of this blood scandal. What did he have to say at this inquiry?
Morning, Alan. He's pretty much said, it wasn't me, Gov, which, given that he was the Secretary of State for Health at the time, is what's upset the families of the victims and survivors. The background, as you point out, this has been described as the biggest treatment disaster in NHS history. Thousands of patients, particularly haemophiliacs, were given a blood-clotting agent called Factor VIII, imported from the United States. However, it was imported with plasma within it donated by prisoners and other groups at risk of blood-borne viruses, meaning thousands of people were infected here. Among them, dozens of young people, haemophiliacs at a boarding school in Hampshire. 72 died from Lord Mayor Treloar College in Alton. Now, by the mid-1980s, once HIV was better understood, and you'll remember, Al, we're of a similar age, the AIDS epidemic at the time, at the early 1980s, not very well understood at the time. It subsequently turned out that, look, blood products could be heat-treated to kill these viruses that they'd been imported with, which the government knew about, but not before. Thousands of people died. Now, the inquiry's been running actually since 2018, taking sessions in different parts of the country and different victims' testimony, but yesterday was the first day of 3 of evidence from the Health Secretary at the time, Kenneth Clarke, and it's his attitude in some of the exchanges that's also upset the families. I've said he pretty much said, well, it wasn't me. He said the emerging controversy hardly ever came across my desk. He told the inquiry, as the tragedy developed, I was aware it was there from time to time, usually on my own instigation. I got the edge of it, but he said, I did not call meetings on it. I was never the minister directly responsible for blood products. I was never asked to take a decision on blood products. I never intervened to take a decision on blood products. As I say, he's pretty much saying, it wasn't me, Gov, and that's partly what's upset survivors and families, Al, of those victims.
Yes, the group Factor VIII that represent victims of the scandal, they've described his conduct in some of the exchanges as disgraceful.
They say they are outraged over his evidence. They've described it as absurd outbursts. They said he treated the inquiry sessions and victims' families with utter contempt. During his evidence, Lord Clarke, Ken Clarke, branded one line of questioning by the inquiry QC, Ms Jenny Richard, as pointless. He described the issue of an AIDS booklet to blood donors as irrelevant evidence. And there were some rather tricky exchanges, shall we say, with the inquiry chair and counsel, as I think the following examples I'll demonstrate.
You're just selecting little extracts as though there was one opinion which I was holding out against. There were people who agreed with me.
Well, don't worry, we'll be looking at as many of the documents as we need to, Lord Clarke, rather than selected.
Well, we can go to a lot if we want. I don't quite sure the point of any of this is. One sentence in thousands of documents of something 40 years ago. What's the relevance of all this? What difference did it make on the ground?
I think the relevance ultimately, Lord Clarke, is for me to determine.
Yeah.
If I think that the questions are unhelpful, then I'll indicate that. But
Tristan, what happens next?
Well, Lord Clarke is due to give evidence over 3 days, so further sessions today and tomorrow as well. He'll be asked whether the government hid information about the known risks of contamination and why calls for compensation were rejected. But whatever the outcome, for those victims and survivors, they've said no compensation could ever make good the immense harm to life of thousands of people affected, the 3,000 deaths, 72 young people, as you say, Al, from Treloar Hospital in Hampshire. We'll hear from some of them live on the programme a little later about what they made of Lord Clarke's testimony and the tone of the hearings that you got a flavour of in that little clip from yesterday. One of those victims, Gary Webster from Portsmouth, told the BBC earlier this summer that he wanted this inquiry to bring around some sort of restitution.
We want to know what happened, why it happened, and we want some sort of recompense, because No one's been able to get mortgages, no one's got jobs anymore, and it's just totally destroyed people's lives.
Further hearings will continue into next year, with the final report expected to be published in 2022 or possibly 2023. Tristan, thank you.
BBC Radio Solent.
9 minutes past 8, good morning. A public inquiry continues later into the contaminated blood scandal which led to the deaths of 72 pupils from a school in Hampshire. The children from Trelaws were treated during the 1970s and 80s for a rare condition that affects the blood's ability to clot. The attitude of the former Health Secretary Lord Clarke, who gave evidence yesterday at the inquiry, was described as disgraceful by the group Factor 8, who are campaigning for a resolution here for what they see as one of the biggest disasters in NHS history. Here's the group founder, Jason Evans.
I think Ken Clarke's attitude has been disgraceful, really, worse than any of us were anticipating.
Lord Clarke, who was the Health Secretary under Margaret Thatcher at the time of the infected blood scandal, left victims and families outraged following what they said were absurd outbursts.
They're just selecting little extracts as though there was one opinion which I was holding out against. There were people who agreed with me.
Well, don't worry, we'll be looking at as many of the documents as we need to, Lord Clarke, rather than selected.
Well, we can go to the lot if we want. I don't quite sure the point of any of this is. It comes to. You're putting weight on one sentence the author had written a few paragraphs before.
Well, in fact...
One sentence in thousands of documents of something 40 years ago.
Inviting your attention to an...
I do seem to have changed my mind, yes. It didn't make any difference, did it?
I think
What happened on the ground?
Not for me to answer questions, Lord
Well,
Clarke.
it is. What's the relevance of all this? What difference did it make on the ground?
I think the relevance ultimately, Lord Clarke, is for me to determine.
Yeah.
If I think that the questions are unhelpful, then I'll indicate that. But
So we will continue to this day to be reviled for condemning haemophiliacs to going back to the kind of life they'd enjoyed before this wonder treatment was devised.
We'll need to unpick quite a lot of what you've described there, Lord Clarke, but I just want to deal with things in a chronological fashion at the moment.
Well, I'm trying to get to the point.
Well, I hope that the next question will take you to the point, Lord Clarke.
Gary Webster is from Eastleigh. He has haemophilia and was given the blood clotting protein Factor 8 in the 70s and 80s while at Trelaws College in Hampshire. Gary, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, Lord Clarke would say that he was trying to be concise, as honest as he possibly could, and understanding the context at the time, rather than looking at it right from this perspective. The context at the time was that it rarely came across his desk. How did you feel listening to that, and do you have any sympathy for him and the evidence he gave?
Do I have any sympathy for him? No, not at all. I agree with Jason, actually. I think it was disgraceful. He didn't answer questions, he avoided questions, tried to cause arguments, wanted to run his evidence. And no, I'm speechless about it, really.
His point that he was making was that at the time, not much was known about any of this, so there would only have ever been a few lines. Now we know about heat treatment and other aspects of looking after and storing blood correctly, but that wasn't the case at the time. And he said he very rarely saw it even come across his desk. Isn't he just being honest with you?
No, we have documents to prove that he knew a lot more than he was saying yesterday. He said yesterday he'd never heard of cryoprecipitate. Well, I mean, that's just unbelievable. I mean, every haemophiliac was on cryo prior to Factor 8 and could have been on cryo after Factor 8. They could have withdrawn Factor 8. I don't believe half of what Ken Clarke says. And as I say again, I believe his actions yesterday were a disgrace.
Because it's impacted your life massively, hasn't it? It's really sculpted the very shape of your life. When you watch it, do you get a sense of feeling exhausted because the process has taken so long? Or does it increase the rage? I mean, where do you put this inquiry as you try and watch it unfold?
Well, I've been living with this for over 40 years now, and the inquiry's been running, I suppose, nearly 4 years. Yeah, there's stages when you get up and you think, oh, yeah, it's going well, and then yesterday, it all brings it back down again. But I think we are doing well. I think the inquiry is finding things. The government made mistakes, practitioners, doctors. I mean, it was a total mistakes all around. And I think in the end we will find truth and we will get the justice that thousands and families and individuals deserve.
And Gary, you may not know the answer to this, but I wonder what that justice looks like for you, being someone who's received a product that has, on many levels, ruined your entire life. What does justice look like?
I think justice to me is we've been lied to for 30, 40 years. They've tried to cover it up. Thousands of people have died. I lost 72 friends at school. I went there at the age of 10. So it does affect you. I mean, it has affected my life throughout my life. Justice, I'd like, we don't want people to go to prison or, get punished in that way. We just want the truth. We want to know what went on, why it went on, and make sure it never happens again.
Gary, I'm sure we'll speak again. Thank you for being so honest with me this morning. Gary Webster from Eastleigh there has haemophilia. He was given a blood clotting protein factor 8 in the 70s and 80s while at Trelaw College. As he said, 72 of his friends or people at his school died. Lord Clarke gave evidence yesterday. We'll give evidence for 3 days. So we'll keep you informed and how that plays out. And other people, of course, as part of that inquiry are going to be giving evidence. The final inquiry details will come out possibly next year, 22, or possibly 23.